Awesome. Thank you, Kristen.
You got it. We'll talk to you later.
Alrighty. Good evening, John. John, can you hear me? Awesome.
Yes, I can hear you.
Awesome. Good to see you. Good evening, Scott, Rena, Andrew. I thought I saw Ty coming in. You all could just unmute and respond just so we know that your technicals are working.
Yep, you can hear me.
Yes.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hi.
Good evening, Barbara. Good evening, Andrew.
Good evening.
Good evening, Ty. Ty, can you hear us?
Hi, I'm trying to turn my camera on, but hi everyone.
All right. Good evening, Jaden.
Good evening. How you doing?
All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have quorum. Good evening, Anne. All right, so I am still, our liaisons, Kirsten and Amina, were unable to join us this evening. So I am multitasking with the waiting room. But as soon as it seems like that has calmed down and we have most people in, we will go ahead and call the meeting to order. Good evening, Ben.
Good evening.
Good evening, Hope. Okay. All right, seeing that we have quorum, we will now call this meeting to order. Our meeting is being recorded and it is also live on YouTube. So we now call to order the Corrections Advisory Committee. Grateful for you all being present this evening on such a last minute notice, recognizing that we are swiftly moving through legislative session. And on one hand and on the other, we have been called to complete a task that has had some obstacles and that we want to take into consideration and strategize on this evening. Recognizing also that the matter of creating the ombuds position is one that has a whole lot of public interest. People are vested in this because they recognize that this position has the potential to truly change a lot of dynamics in regards to how the Department of Corrections functions conditions in the care of those that are in their custody. And with that said, tonight's meeting is in the meeting format. It's not in that webinar format where people will have to wait until later. So with that in mind, I do want us to keep some protocol and etiquette in place. So as we are moving through the agenda, and much of this meeting will be led by Co-Chair Teig, because I have a sick 3-year-old with a fever and I'm going to be multitasking, so I will come off camera unless we are voting, but I am present. But for most of the meeting, if there is a matter of discussion, we ask that the general public, and I'll put a note of this in the chat, respect that the Teig will move for the committee to have discussion first. We will welcome the comments of the general public second, and if it is necessary for there to be a motion, there'll be a motion made after that. So there will be opportunities to speak and to participate. In the chat, we will be monitoring, the chairs will be monitoring the chat and responding accordingly. But we just ask that this is, again, a matter that may deal with a whole lot of emotion, as well as processing some of the challenges that are before us. So we just ask that we keep a decorum in mind. With that said, I am going to yield to Teig to move us through our agenda for this evening.
Okay, thank you, Melinda. And yeah, we certainly understand if you have to jump off screen. Hope your child feels better. I essentially just want to update everyone, both on the committee and any members of the public on a few issues that have impacted our progress in fulfilling, our obligation to identify candidates for and recruit candidates for the correction ombuds position and get this office up and running. So the members of the committee will be familiar at least with one of these obstacles, which has just been the delays in receiving approval and classification for the new position that will be in the Office of Governmental Accountability. And that's just sort of administrative limbo that we've been in with the Department of Administrative Services and the Office of Professional Management. And I'll provide a little bit of an update on that. But probably more salient are more recent concerns that we've encountered regarding the appropriation for the office, which I, at least, and I think others would share this opinion, believe is inadequate. Before I present these updates, I do want to note that Melinda and I forwarded the notice of this meeting and an invitation to members of the Judiciary Committee and the Appropriations Committee, I believe the Health Committee, as well as relevant staff at DAS and OPM, with a specific request that DAS staff and the co-chairs of the Judiciary Committee join us. I'm disappointed that none of these people could be with us tonight to answer questions, because I probably won't be able to answer some of the questions that you all have. But that said, we understand it's an after-hours meeting. It's one of the busiest weeks of the year for legislators. So we certainly do understand why folks were unable to attend. But I sort of mentioned this because it's been a little bit of a piece with frustrations I've felt getting this moving, which I think I can attribute to my own naivete and inexperience with state government. But it certainly has been more of a slog than I expected. The members of this committee, we were all appointed to sort of fulfill certain roles or based on certain expertise, but I don't think any of us were appointed based on expertise in appropriations or human resources. And so some of these obstacles were unexpected, at least for me. So I do want to, with sort of on that note, encourage all of us on the committee and members of the public, to the extent you do have connections on, influence with the Judiciary Committee, Appropriations Committee, DAS, OPM, the Governor's Office, to use that influence, to use your connections. I do not, and it's been very clear to me that I do not, because I'm not able to exercise a lot of influence over this process. And you'll see why becomes more important as I provide the updates. So first, I just want to get through sort of the simpler one, which has to do with the job description, right? What we all thought we were, what was our job, right? To create a job description and to recruit candidates and interview candidates for the position. As you'll all recall, we did vote to approve a job description at our last meeting on March 27th. That was subject to the revisions that we sort of discussed during the meeting. So thereafter, Melinda and I finalized it and submitted it to our liaison on the Judiciary Committee. We eventually got the name of a contact or liaison with the Department of Administrative Services, and we submitted the description back on April 12th. Nothing, I don't know what's happened since then. We've checked in basically weekly. The response has been that it is pending with the Office of Professional Management, or OPM, if I have that right. Yes, Office of Professional Management. I've learned this week, last night, I learned that DAS did submit this description to OPM. They were told it would require a new classification, and OPM followed up on May 10th with questions for DAS, which DAS responded to, and the request remains pending with OPM. This I find frustrating. I feel impatient about it, but it may be unavoidable. I'm told that this is not unusual. So it may be a case of sort of shame on us for thinking something could be simple. I think the more concerning obstacle that I want to address for the rest of the meeting is the appropriation. But before I turn to that, if anybody does have, particularly on the committee, questions about the job posting and where we stand with DAS, I'll just pause and we can address those and then move on to the budget issue.
Tag,
Tag out. I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
Melinda, you go.
no,
first.
no problem. Go ahead.
Just for clarification, I'm not familiar with the Office of Professional Management. I'm familiar with the Office of Policy and Management.
There you go. Sorry, I misspoke. Yeah, policy and management.
So that, to your point, that is not. It's normal procedure to have those types of conversations. But again, to your point, is the job description for this position of the ombudsman probably historically exists, going back in time.
Right.
What the ramifications or what the description was or what the qualifications would be for this particular position. I just want to get that on the record. Yeah,
you're right. I mean, there was an existing ombuds within DOC, right? And we've also pointed out that there are similar positions in other more independent positions within the Office of Governmental Accountability. But again, you know, taking the folks I've spoken to at their word, it's just part of the process, and we'll continue to put pressure on. I invite any of you who have contacts with DAS or OPM, which again is Office of Policy and Management, to exercise that influence. But you know, it's almost a moot point if we don't have enough money for the office to get off the ground. So to that, this at least the appropriation for the office had not been really a concern of mine. Sorry, I see Ben, go ahead.
So I had one quick question about the timeline. Can you remind me and maybe the whole group what the statute lays out the timeline and when we're supposed to fill this position?
Yeah, I mean, I think even when we started, we were outside of that timeline because we were not appointed as a committee and didn't have our meeting within that timeline. I don't have it in front of me, but I know that we're way past it.
Okay.
And, you know, at least when we were appointed, I can recall, you know, someone on the Judiciary Committee saying, you know, kind of, we're going to move forward as best we can, recognizing that it's outside of the dates provided in the legislation. I hope this doesn't become an issue, but yeah, we're well outside that.
Thanks for that.
Tag, so I'd like to, it's a kind of in between the the issue of the job description and the issue of the appropriations. Just 1 minute. And the issue of the appropriations. The minute I decide to talk, I'm sorry. And that is that there's a bill moving through currently in session that seeks to add to the actual position outside of the scope of work that we've described in the job position. And so if I can show you all really quickly, this is Senate Bill 957, an amendment to Senate Bill 957. This work was taking place last year and is last year the result of the work pushing forward for the Department of Corrections healthcare system to be regulated. As a result of that push, Commissioner Quiros was mandated to create a report around how he would amend the issues that are taking place within the Department of Corrections healthcare system. He created that report, and the step afterwards was to identify an oversight body. And the conversation that was had all along was that the Department of Public Health would become that oversight body. But what you'll see in this amendment is one, that it strikes all. So the original bill called for the Department of Public Health to be that oversight body, to work in combination with the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services to come up with a series of reporting structures. It called for a sub-department to be created within the Department of Public Health specific to the Department of Corrections. But this says strike all. And then what is most concerning with our work as it interacts with our work is it calls for the correction ombuds appointed pursuant of the bill that we have worked on to now be the Joint Standing Committee of the General Assembly, having cognizance of matters relating to public health regarding the provisions of healthcare services to inmates of correctional facilities, including but not limited to the number of personnel needed in the correctional facilities to provide an appropriate level of healthcare. This is not within the realm or the scope of work of how this position was identified in the statutes in its original language or in the job description that we created. There's two things at hand here, concerns that are at hand here. One is that this is out of the scope of work. And two, even if we decided as a committee to roll this into the scope of work, there is no budget for this position to expand in this way. So I just wanted to pose that as the issue. And for anyone that wants to look it up on their side, again, it's Senate Bill 957.
Yeah, thank you, Melinda. I mean, that is definitely a concern, and I had been thinking of it as a budgetary concern, but you're right. I mean, this is not something that we baked into the job description. There's a lot of reasons that we're going to have to revise or revisit that, but this is a major one. And you know, I know that you've been following this, so I'll defer to you, but it certainly seems like an impactful development for our work. So yeah, I at least was expecting, you know, again, this is my own naivete, that we had an appropriation of about $670,000 for this office. That's because that was what the Office of Fiscal Management had stated would be required to fund an ombuds, one ombuds and 6 staff. You know, as far as I'm concerned, that's what folks voted for, knowing that that's the cost, that's what you voted for, that's what the governor understood signing this bill. We were looking as we developed the job description, as you folks will recall, for some clarification or certainty about that, so that we could understand what the salary of the ombuds position would be. And that, I'm afraid, I never really received. But things sort of took a turn when the fiscal year 24-25 budget was released from appropriations, which had no mention of the ombuds position. And you know, Mel, among others, I know, raised this concern. We raised the concern with Judiciary. Frankly, I still didn't understand the urgency of it until last week, when thankfully folks who are keeping an eye on us and making sure we're doing all that we can raised it as well. We have since, as of this week, received confirmation that there is a $400,000 appropriation for the office. This appropriation was initially made in a fiscal year 23 revision. That's the year coming to an end. And although this was in some doubt last week, we have now confirmed that it will be also appropriated for the coming biennium for 24 and 25. However, if we were concerned about 670,000 or so being inadequate for this office, certainly $400,000 seems inadequate for the scope, even the original scope of work, to say nothing of the additional healthcare mandate that Melinda was just describing. I'll just, we haven't done a deep dive on this, but as far as I know, $400,000 is below the other Connecticut independent sort of government oversight agencies like the Children's Advocate, et cetera. It is certainly, as far as we can tell, far below that appropriated by other states. And we've just been trying to put this together this week. But there are a few other states with independent corrections ombuds. Iowa, which is a state similar population to Connecticut with a significantly lower inmate population, has $2 million appropriated for its ombuds. That's for 1 ombuds, 15 staff. New Jersey, which is a similar inmate population, is $784,000 for 1 ombuds and 8 staff. Michigan is just over $1 million. Washington State, 1.1 million. Arizona, 1.5 million. This information comes from an analysis that the Virginia Department of Corrections commissioned when they were proposing their own similar office. What they proposed for Virginia was 2.5 million. And if you, with thanks to Hope Metcalf, who just sent this over to me, I'm not sure, I'm not as good at sharing the screen, but I think if you look at it as a per prisoner basis, per capita, we're just about the lowest. Michigan is slightly lower, but Iowa is $243 per incarcerated person. New Jersey is about $60, Washington State about $90. We'd be just under $40 per incarcerated person for this position. And again, although we haven't done the dive, we're looking at an office that may have a much broader responsibility when it's taking care of inmate healthcare concerns that we thought were originally appropriated to or assigned to other offices. So, we're concerned about this. I'm concerned about this. I suspect all of us are concerned about this. This is not enough money to fund this office. We're in a position a week now, right, where there's a lot of negotiations and back and forth about the budget. And, I just want to point out that this office has not had, it doesn't exist yet. So it hasn't had a staff person, a representative to be in the room, advocating for adequate funding. And again, I don't think most of us on this committee had any appreciation that this was our responsibility until now, but somebody has to step up, and it's going to have to be us and, other allies. It is some relief to know that there is at least some money appropriated, but it's, just this $400,000 amount. But I want to just sort of state in this public meeting that it is not enough, that this office requires additional funding. It requires at least the amount that the Office of Fiscal Analysis had suggested would be required, which was $667,000 for the first year, and probably more going forward, particularly given the recent legislation expanding the role of the ombuds. I don't know what we can do. This is where I invite other members of the committee, of the public, to use whatever influence you have to advocate for appropriate funding for this position. One note that I would make is that there was, as I noted, $400,000 appropriated in the fiscal year 23 revision, which hasn't been touched because we don't have an office yet. To me, I think as a stopgap measure, if that amount is carried over into the next fiscal year, we at least have something to work with. We've raised this, and I have heard indirectly as of this week that it does not seem likely, but I don't think we should accept that necessarily as a final answer. Again, as I've made pretty clear, I lack influence. I'm just a dad in Westville, basically. I've expressed my concerns and I'll ask your forgiveness, but I've expressed them, I think, on behalf of all of us, or a vast majority of us, and I'm not getting much traction. Anybody else who has influence, who knows folks on appropriations, on judiciary, in the governor's office, wherever, I'd ask you to exercise whatever influence you have now in the coming hours, days, week, because we're down to the line. Again, we have some money. We can move forward. We can try to recruit somebody, but we're not going to be able to really offer the salary that I think this job requires, and more importantly, this sort of reflection of how seriously the state takes the office and the position. If we're saying, we're a quarter of the budget that Iowa has attributed to this office, it doesn't send the message that I think we want to send, that we want the best people to apply for this job because we take it seriously. So that's basically the update. The update is right now we have $400,000, and I don't think it's enough, and I suspect most of you don't think it's enough. And so let's talk about what we can do in these late days. I'm going to open it up. I think there's something in the chat. Oh, Melinda's on good. So yeah, Andrew had, I think, exactly the same point that I just made, which does seem to me to be a reasonable sort of interim solution, which is taking the existing 400,000 and rolling it over. We'll continue to make that request. Again, I've indirectly heard that was not likely. Okay, any, sorry.
Just to be clear,
Go ahead, Melinda, yeah.
Just to be clear, Tig, you were citing Andrew Clark, right? Not our Andrew.
I'm citing Andrew Gearing for having the same suggestion. Andrew Clark, just for folks who's on the call here, has been really helpful to us in trying to sort of strategize how we can move things forward. He was on an email earlier. I think it came, I think Barb Fair was informed that it didn't seem likely. But again, I don't know that we need to necessarily take that as a final answer. I think, one minimum step we can take is to, as we've suggested via email, make a formal request via a letter to the Judiciary and Appropriations chairs for that to happen. And, I think Melinda and I can do that on behalf of the committee, but we're welcome other ideas. And I see Ben and Mel have hands up. Melinda, if you're on, I'll let you MC, so to speak.
Yes, we acknowledge Ben. You're muted, Ben.
One clarifying question with the bill, the Senate bill, I forget, 975, I think was the number that proposed. Was there a fiscal note attached to that, sort of describing the expansion of the role?
So Senate Bill 957, no, there is not.
Okay. Unfortunately, I think until that bill is passed, we can only sort of deal with the role that is currently in the statute. That said, I agree with everything that Tig mentioned, that this sounds like insufficient funds, that we just won't be able to even recruit the right people for the right role. But unfortunately, until 957 passes, I think we just have to focus on the role that is in the statute for now, anticipating potentially a change in the future.
Yeah, to just answer your question with more clarity, I just pulled up the fiscal note attached to the amendment. And so it all goes to public health. It's not going to the ombuds and the state comptroller. And the reason why I brought it up is because I agree, Dr. Howell, that we can't do anything until it passed, but right now we can do something so it does not pass if we're in agreement that this position should not expand to this, because the debate that has been going on is the need over the health, the regulation and oversight of the health itself is so extensive that it could not be done by the ombuds by themselves. And that's why we were like, from the beginning, no, it's not the ombuds position. But if that is also the will of this body, then in the interim, we can push against that bill and submit to, I believe it was Senator Anwar, who has been the proponent of this bill, but he's also the one that submitted that amendment to say that that's not acceptable, that's not going to work. So that is something we could do if we decided to.
Understood.
Mel, did you lower your hand?
Yeah, just because y'all had already recognized me. Apologies that I'm off camera through the co-chairs. 2 points. Given the status of the legislature, we are now past what the appropriation committee members really have control over, as well as judiciary members. And really this at this point is as the negotiations this week will happen between Senate and House Republican and Democrat leadership, I think really the targets probably here are Speaker of the House Ritter, Majority Leader Rojas, Senate Pro Tem Martin Looney, and Senate Majority Leader Bob Duff, as well as Republican minority leaders. I think are probably the right targets at this point. And I think an official letter from our council commission is probably with everyone signing on is probably the right way to handle that. Copying the various co-chairs of the relevant committees, I think makes the most sense. That's at least that's something that I would lift up. And then similarly, I think submitting a similar letter on the Senate bill that has been raised as an area of concern and outreach to Senator Anwar to, I think, appropriately signal it was not necessarily that we're against the concept of what the bill is aiming for, but that at the stage of where we're at with the ombudsman, we would be asking for them to hold off for a year until we can kind of get this office up and running, figure out the budget issues, and come back actually next year. I see Senator Anwar's idea as an opportunity to resize the budget of the ombudsman. And so if Senator Anwar would be a willing partner, there's a way to tackle the budget challenges that this office has in the upcoming fiscal year, the upcoming legislative session, which I think is also just as a reminder for everyone, right? Right now, we're trying to hire an ombudsman, and $400,000 is not enough for this office, but it is enough to hire the first person at a good salary. And we will have more opportunity to present ideas at the state capitol, and one that comes from the policing world, in which you have like a lot of local police oversight bodies have usually been tied to a percentage of the local police department budget. And I think similarly here, we can come up with a proposal to talk with the chairs over the summer, tying the budget of the office ombudsman to a percentage of what the Department of Corrections department budget is, as a way to protect and ensure that oversight is well funded given the funding size of the department itself. So sorry, that was a lot to throw at everyone, but just those are initial thoughts that came to mind.
No, thank you for that perspective, and for paving a way of strategy, understanding that now that the target is really more so the Senate and the House, where negotiations are moving next. I want to acknowledge a comment in the chat before we move to comments from Committee Member Kapoor. Ms. Barbara Fair says in the chat that concerns need to be mentioned now, so legislators do not vote favorably for the amendment. So we hear that, and we are echoing that if we were to take action, that it would be with the Senate and the House, more particularly those in leadership, to explain why this is not an opportune moment to add this additional task onto this position. Rena?
Is one of the chairs of the appropriations Senator Austin? Because I guess, a few people in this group are also involved with some of the Sentencing Commission's work on mental health and health in corrections. And I know through that Senator Austin has been a big champion of that work and cares a great deal about health in corrections. And I just wondered, she's a former corrections officer, if there's any sort of appeal to her about the funding of this.
Ty, did you want to speak to the communication that has gone out thus far?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I know Senator Austin's name came up in some of our communications. I could probably look it up. I don't know if, do you remember specifically, Melinda? Hold on a second.
No, I believe in general, there was an appeal made to both of the co-chairs in regards to just asking where the appropriations was. That was the first conversation because we were just trying to figure out where is it in the first place. But since that time, we haven't had a follow-up discussion with these specific matters.
Yeah.
I wanted to also lean on Barbara Fair because I believe she reached out to the appropriations committee. Don't get me to name it wrong, Barbara, but feel free to chime in and share what you heard from the appropriations committee.
What was the question? What did I hear from them on what?
In regards to the appropriations and moving the issue forward for moving the fiscal amount from what was appropriated for 2023 into dividing it into 2024 and 2025 because it was used in this year.
Okay, the person I heard from was what's her name? Miss King.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's who I heard from. And she was saying, I didn't understand the whole thing. That's why I sent you the email. But she was saying something like that. There was no need to move that 2023 budget forward. But I really don't understand what that was all about because she was talking about something about the biannual budget. Did you get that, Andrew? So maybe you understand what she's talking about.
The chairs, do you want me to respond to that?
Yeah, I sent you an email.
Yes, Andrew, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. I think my recommendation on that is that any ask, this is per Mel as well, then any ask for the carry forward to be applied to the next biennium be from the Correctional Oversight Committee directly. If it's the chairs, it's the chairs or the entire committee, and that an argument be made as to why you think that should be done. Something to be aware of is right now, they're in negotiations for, I believe, a $50 billion biennial budget, and there's a lot of competing interests there. And so, this is a really difficult time for anybody to get on that agenda. And but what you do have in your favor is a carry forward. Was the big issue right now is that not that the state doesn't have the funds, there are actually surplus funds, but that there's a spending cap, a constitutional spending cap that they can't go over. The benefit of the carry forward funds is that those funds were already accounted for in last year's spending cap deliberations. So they would not be applied to this year's spending cap. So that takes out a big hurdle for a consideration. But that still does require it be put in the next biennium. So I would suggest if you wanted to do that, that what you do is by virtue of the Correctional Oversight Committee, you make that recommendation, you use your best argument as to why that is, and the chips will fall where they are. Now, also per Mel, I think the biggest concern may be getting that first position. And then there's always the opportunity in the next legislative session to make an additional ask. But yes, hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I'll just clarify for Rena, the way we got here is that Senator Ostin was copied on those emails that were mentioned. So she's at least aware of this. But I think we're getting to a resolution that we'll write this letter, and I think she'd be among the people we'd copy, even if we're directing it to leadership.
Scott, we recognize your hand raised.
I'm hitting a lot of buttons. I apologize. Couple things to consider is, look, I want to go on record that this is totally underfunded, and Tag and I, and I think Melinda and I were speaking, going back historically, probably we should be in the realm of 1.6 million. And to Dr. Kapoor's point, I think it's imperative that they have a qualified practitioner with a mental health and medical background to serve the ombudsman's office, based on the circumstances that they're dealing with now with medical and mental health care, recruitment and everything that comes with that, and policy and practice. But that being said, the chairs are aware, and committee members are aware that I suggested to take a formalized approach and request through the legislature to ask the Office of Fiscal Analysis to conduct some research with regard to some of these other jurisdictions that were previously mentioned in this discussion, so we have a better handle on what the cost, the budgeted cost would be to put in place something that would be appropriate for the services that need to be rendered within the system and within our responsibilities within the statute. And I appreciate Mel's response. It's like, take what you can get. But at the end of the day, I think that Andrew knows that at some point they're going to have an opportunity to do a revisor, and this may be the time to just at least add on to that what was originally proposed for implementation, and then work off of that. I just don't see with that appropriation how you're going to do an appropriate assessment and service to the system, and also apply some of the other important aspects such as mental health and medical and the analytical approach that needs to be considered.
Thank you. I think we are easing into action and clarifying what our next actions will be, which is a good place to be. Dr. Kapoor?
This is just sort of related, but going back to SB 957, am I understanding correctly that the point of it is to take the oversight of healthcare out of DPH and put it into the Office of the Ombuds, but the fiscal note said that all the money goes to DPH and another agency, but none of it to the ombuds?
Yeah, in short. So
Okay.
there is no oversight for the Department of Corrections Healthcare. Connecticut is the only state where the Department of Corrections oversees and operates its own healthcare system internally. And so the original thought was that the Department of Public Health would take on the responsibility of oversight and regulation, and that would require them within the department to create a sub-department that's specific for that work. That was the original intention. If you look at the original bill draft, apparently that fiscal note was too hefty. And so the way that they've chopped it down is to say that now the Department of Public Health will create an annual report, they'll review a couple of things, they'll help institute a task force, but the bulk of the work will fall on the ombuds. Now, as to why the fiscal note doesn't indicate any of the money going to the ombuds, but still has it allocated to the Department of Public Health, there is no explanation in the paperwork.
Right, because right now it sort of makes it seem like the ombuds is going to do for free what the DPH required a whole lot more money to do. And that's just silliness, and someone should tell them that.
Can I add to this? It's
Yes.
Scott. I would just argue that, in my view, I may be mistaken, if someone can clarify, but in terms of the authority of the Department of Public Health, their function should already consider oversight over any type of medical care throughout the state. So I don't know if that's being misinterpreted. I've through my experience in my career, I've had significant engagement with public health about circumstances within an agency. So that may be another inquiry as far as I'm concerned. But in terms of practice within, their authority, I don't see that as a hands-off approach as a separate agency. They have a role and obligation. And if an agency fits within those obligations, those responsibilities remain.
Thank you for that reflection. Mel?
Sorry. Yes. Yeah, I want to lift up something that Andrew Clark mentioned, which is the fiscal cap that the state is facing and the ongoing discussion of every nonprofit, every government agency right now has been since January advocating for budget allocations. We are lifting up this like mini campaign to right size and fund this office within what remains of less than 2 weeks of a legislative session. And so I'm just gonna be real. That's a really big task. I think Andrew provided really great advice on an argument for a carryover in addition to what we think should be the 400,000 that was already supposedly coming to the office this way. That's a total of 800,000. I also think we need to be wide-eyed and realistic here as a commission. This is going to take a year to lift up and set this office off and running. And so a budget allocation of 800,000 in its first year with us, the job description is about to get posted. The hiring process is probably going to take 4 months because it's the state. We're not really well suited even right now to fully run, to make sure that this office is running at capacity if it had the 800,000. I think that's just being realistic. And I do think we need to have, I see this, the Senate bill amendment kind of threat thing as an opportunity to communicate to Senator Anwar that I think speaking for myself as a commission member, I do think that the ombudsman should be looking into the healthcare services, right? But that means that it needs more funding. And so I see it as an opportunity in the next session to kind of advance an argument for a more robust ombudsman office, given that there seems to be a variety of interests in our favor. So just want to lift up, we should be realistic about the timeline. One, we should be realistic about the state of this office and how quickly it's actually going to be up and running. And right now, we need to think about moving very quickly. A letter needs to go to leadership tomorrow is kind of the scenario that we're in to move this conversation, and equally to at least try to see if we can pause progress on Senate Bill 947. And I would actually prioritize communication to the House, because that bill has to get voted out of the Senate, then go to the House. And so maybe getting in front of Speaker Ritter and Majority Leader Rojas at the outset is probably a better direction to go in than reaching the Senate right now.
Thank you for those reflections, Mel. I think there are actions that have been outlined by committee members, and there's also significant comments in the chat. Thank you, Anne, for resounding the importance of Andrew Clark's recommendations regarding the fiscal cap, which were also reiterated by Mel. And thank you, Barbara, for sharing the documentation in the chat. and the need to ask for the carryover versus petitioning otherwise. Healthcare is too huge for the person in the ombuds position. Yes, we are in agreement with that. In order for this body to move forward in any action, we would need a motion. And right now there are 2 actions before us that I've heard at least, and we can clarify those in discussion and who would be able to move those actions forward before we put forward a motion. It seems as though we are looking to move on a letter to the Senate and House leadership in regards to the need to move forward the appropriations that was for 2023 to be carried over into 2024 and 2025 and distributed evenly, and to set forth in that also the dissatisfaction of the amount that has been appropriated or allocated for this office. So we can stop with that one first. Is that what we've said? Nods are good, thumbs ups are good. Okay. Is there a person willing to do that? To set forth that letter, which we would name ourselves as the committee members? Anyone willing to take a work on that draft?
Before we get there, may I propose discussion?
Yes.
We're making that recommendation based on the fact it's within the waning days of the legislative session. I would also suggest that you copy the committees of cognizance.
Okay. Thank you for that recommendation.
And I would be happy to write this letter, but I'm buried in work.
I hear you. Any other discussion? Any volunteer?
I mean, I feel like I'm going to write the letter. It may be more of a skeleton of the letter that I'll try to do immediately after the meeting. I have a brief due tomorrow, so I got a long night ahead of me anyway. But I'll put something down and pass it around, and folks can hopefully improve upon it. I agree that we should send it tomorrow. I think Mel just said that. I think there's that kind of urgency.
Thank you,
And I
Tig.
can move then for this action.
So moved. So I believe Committee Chair Tig is moving for us to send a letter requesting that the appropriations for the Ombuds office be allocated to 2024 or carried over to 2024, 2025 in even proportion. And he is moving for this to take place. We are looking for a second.
Seconded.
Second. It has been moved and properly second. Is there any other discussion? Okay.
Just for purpose of
Yes.
discussion, Tig, feel free to send that to me if you want me to take a look at it. I'll be happy to try to help as best I can.
Many thanks.
Thank
I'll send
you.
it to everybody. But yeah, if you have particular expertise or insights, I welcome them.
Thank you. It has been moved and properly second. All those in favor can indicate with an aye and unmute.
Aye.
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 Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. Thank you. All right, the second matter of resolution that it seemed that we came up with is in regards to, and just like that, mommy brain will get you. Tig, help me out.
I think it was writing
I'm
a
guessing it
letter
relates
to
to this.
Anwar. Yeah, Anwar and
Thank you.
957.
In regards to 957, that we want to express our objection of moving forward the amendment that's listed, which is, I believe, LCO 7145, because our argument is that that scope of work is not in the original context of this position. And we have not had the opportunity to establish the office, neither the position to even be able to consider an expansion. If that is our position, Is anybody willing to take a stab at drafting that particular letter, which would be sent to Senator Anwar, who was the proponent of the bill and the amendment? Or is there thought that it needs to expand beyond Senator Anwar? Does it need to go anywhere else?
You're referencing Senate Bill 957? Is that
Yes.
okay? In the bill, I just took a quick glance. Does it make any reference to inclusion of Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services?
So you'll see that there's two different versions because there's the bill that went through, but there's an amendment, there's the LCO 7514 amendment, 7145 amendment, and the amendment starts with strike all. So in the bill, it did say that they would work with Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, but it struck all of that down, and there's no mention of the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services and the amendment.
Thank you.
Any other points of clarity? The question on the floor was, is anyone willing to take a stab at drafting that letter to Senator Anwar? All right, I'll take that one. Not a problem. And I'll do the same and send it around before we submit or any additional reflections. Dr. Howell?
Yeah, just Melinda, I just think making sure that we include in the text that also the appropriation for that role as well. Like there's no appropriation, that even if they expanded the role, which we don't think is appropriate, there's also not appropriation. It should be noted.
I'll be sure to include that. All right, so look.
I also just, I don't know if we include Scott's sort of point about that DPH already has statutory oversight over all healthcare provision in the state, that like it doesn't necessarily, I don't know how to fit that in, but that it was a good point to be made.
Thank you. All right, so looking for a motion that we as a committee will submit a letter to Senator Anwar in objection of Amendment 7145 on Senate Bill 957, which would seek to use the Office of the Corrections Ombuds in healthcare oversight for the Department of Corrections, because we see this as unfitting for the role because it was not originally designed as that in the statute. Looking for a motion.
Well,
So moved.
Before you go, I'm sorry, Ben, go ahead.
No, it was Andrew.
Oh, Andrew,
But
go ahead.
We
I think we're going to
the
say the same
discussion.
thing.
Yeah.
No, I was going to move the motion, but that's okay.
Okay.
Just clarification, with regard to Senator Anwar, is he the sponsor of the bill, the chair of the Public Health Committee?
Both, yes.
So my recommendation would also be to send this letter to the chairs of the appropriate committee. In this case, it would be Public Health.
Okay. So amending that
Sure.
motion then?
Sorry.
Yep.
I don't know how to raise the hand. I apologize. If for discussion, I don't really have a position on this, but I did, hear Mel state like, maybe this is a good thing for hypothetically an ombuds to have in his or her remit or in the office's remit, but we need the funding for it. So I would suggest, although I don't have a strong feeling about it, that we make the point that it's not within the scope of the position as outlined, and that it is unfunded based on this amendment, without necessarily taking a strong position that we don't think it should ever be part of the ombuds position, but that it is not, and that it cannot be without significant additional funding. Something like that what might reflect, at least I don't want to speak for Mel, but that's what I thought I heard him say. And I take both positions. It seems like it's way too big for the current role that we've seen described, or that we've described, and that it would require additional staff. On the other hand, maybe it would be a good thing if we were able to get all that staffing and funding for this to be part of the ombuds oversight.
That does accurately reflect what I was saying. We're asking for a pause in a conversation with Senator Anwar over the summer. that's my sense of what makes the most sense for thinking about the future of this office and the immense amount of funding we think it probably requires to do even the portion of the job that it's been currently allocated to do.
Mhm. Thank you for those reflections. So correcting the motion and trying again, scratching the motion and trying again. Apologize for not remembering my Robert's Rules of Order as to what to call it when you scratch the motion, but we're scratching the motion. So we are moving, or we are looking for a motion to submit a letter to Senator Anwar, clearly stating that at this time, we are not in support of Amendment 7145 of Senate Bill 957, because we believe at this time it is unfitting for the ombuds to take on this additional task. And it was not, as it was not originally designed in the state statute. Also, we will be flagging that there was not appropriate appropriations identified to support the ombuds in this role. Seeking a motion.
So moved.
Thank you, Mel. Seeking a second.
A second.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Dr. Howell.
Sorry. Small little detail that would be inclusive of the that letter would be inclusive of the designated public health chairs.
Thank you. Amending the motion to make sure that it is also inclusive of the designated public health chairs.
So moved.
Thank you, Scott. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Ty. It has been moved and properly second. Any other discussion? If there is no further discussion, those who are in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you. Any abstentions? Any opposed? The motion carries. We will submit that letter as well on tomorrow. So that concludes those elements that required us to come to a decision to move forward on how we would like to take action. Is there any other discussion before we conclude or adjourn our meeting tonight?
I have one point of question that I wanted to bring up. I know it was raised that we should ask for the legislative office to, or some, I forget the exact terminology, to investigate sort of how much these roles are funded for in other states. I know we have that document for Virginia. It does sound like it would be good to have that in our sort of legislature library or whatever, so that we have a document similar that we can point to that like this role is underfunded. I don't know how who we just asked like a legislator to bring that up, but that was something else that was brought up.
Thank you. Any thought on how to move that forward? I think Mel, you shared a pathway for that in the chat, right? And asking a legislator to appeal to.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is really easy. Any legislator could submit a question to the Office of Legislative Research. And so between now and next section, we can have a legislator do that, and they'll do the research and have that publicly available.
Okay. Between now and next session, you said?
Yeah. I don't see it as a huge emergency right now, but yeah, we can just have a legislator do that.
So Dr. Howell, if you're in agreement and the committee is in agreement, we'll take that as a point of information to take action on at another time. Thank you. All right. Well, if all hearts and minds are clear, thank you all for being able to so swiftly come together and move these things forward. Make the research we already have as an addendum to the letter ones. Thank you, Anne, for offering up the research that Stop Solitary CT has done in support of the letter that we are submitting. Can you unmute and clarify which letter you'd like to attach that to, or you're offering that support for?
When we send the letter talking about the scope of work of the ombuds position, and when we talk about the funding, not the scope, when we talk about the funding, we already have research on what other states, how much they have funded these positions for. So rather than requesting them do the research, which is just it gives them another excuse to keep delaying everything. I think we should attach it as an addendum to your letter.
Okay, so I'd ask Anne and the Stop Solitary CT team if you can send that supporting information to Tig, to send it out to the committee.
I think Hope sent it to Ty. Hope, didn't you already send it to Ty?
No, that Ty has that information already. It
Yeah.
actually, it
You're all
was
talking
research.
about the Virginia,
Yeah.
sorry to talk,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
And I think pointing out, excuse me, but I think pointing out the per incarcerated person amount of money is really important per state as well
Okay,
as their total budgets.
thank
So
you,
if we have it, don't ask for it.
thank you. Understood. All right, again, thank you all. And at this time, we will move to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, second.
Ended.
Thank you, Mel. All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Aye. Any opposed? Too bad, we're gone. Farewell. Have a good evening. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.